What up, nerds? How's it going? My name is Leslie, this is The Nerdy Narrative, and today we're going to talk about the Sword of Shannara and my review. I finally finished this book, and now I would like to share with you what I think. So this book is a series, the Shannara Chronicles by Terry Brooks, and this is a series I picked up several years ago. I found it when I was moving, and I recently watched the TV show, and I wanted to see if I still thought the TV series was as great as I did before reading the books. So this is an experiment to see if I still visualize the show when I'm reading or if it changes to something different once I read the words the author wrote. So let's start with the back of the book. The Sword of Shannara is the first volume of the classic series that has become one of the most popular fantasy tales of all time. We're just going to wait and hold off on discussing that until we get a little bit further in. The Sword of Shannara is the first volume of the classic series that has become one of the most popular fantasy tales of all time. Or is it? Long ago, the wars of the ancient evil ruined the world. In peaceful Shady Vale, half-elfin Shay Omsford knows little of such troubles. But the supposedly dead warlock lord is plotting to destroy everything in his wake. The sole weapon against this power of darkness is the Sword of Shannara, which can only be used by a true heir of Shannara. On Shay, the last of his bloodline, rest the hopes of all the races. Thus begins the enthralling Shannara epic, a spellbinding tale of adventure, magic, and myth. Okay, let's talk about this book. So the version I picked up was copyrighted in April of 1977. So I am literally 1 month older than this book. I was very confused because, as I said, I watched the TV adaptation first, and I discovered very quickly that the TV series actually started with the second book, which is the Elfstones of Shannara, and I was confused. I was like, I mean, this is a big boy. Looks like tons of material for a TV show to have several seasons with, so why did they start with the second in the series instead of the first? That is a question that did get answered as I continued reading this book. But I did briefly consider skipping to the second book in the series since that's the one that the show picked up with, but then I thought, you know what, no, I'm going to do this the right way, because if I had discovered this series before the TV show, I would have started with book 1. I wouldn't have started with book 2. So I wanted to do it the way I would have done it naturally. This book has a great beginning. The first 3 chapters definitely caught and held my attention and had me 100% invested in this story. Within those chapters, I was like, you know what? I'm glad I am reading this book because it is answering a lot of the questions that I actually had about the TV show. You know, I mentioned in my review about the TV adaptation, I was confused because it looked like it took place after our present time. However, while they had rusted out swing set playgrounds, cars, I was confused. I was like, where did all that tech go? And so it looked like it came after our time, but then again, it looked like it was primitive because they're living in villages and farming again and all that. That question was answered in the book very early on. And Al-Anon is basically explaining to Flick and Shay a little bit of what's going on because he has come to the Shady Vale to begin the quest, which is obviously from reading the back of the book. The quest is Shay is the last heir of Shannara, and they need to go get the Sword of Shannara in order to defeat the Warlock Lord. So this is Al-Anon speaking. As you know, I'm sure, the Great Wars brought an end to an age where man alone was the dominant race. Man was almost completely destroyed, and even the geography he had known was completely altered, completely restructured. Countries, nations, and governments all ceased to exist as the last members of the human race fled south to survive. It was nearly 1,000 years before man had once again raised himself above the standard of the animals he hunted for food and established a great progressive civilization. It was primitive to be sure, but there was an order and a semblance of government. Then man began to discover there were other races besides himself inhabiting the world, creatures who had survived the great wars and developed their own races. In the mountains were the huge trolls, powerful and ferocious, but quite content with what they had. In hills and forests were the small and cunning creatures we now call gnomes. Many a battle was fought between men and gnomes for the rights to land during the years following the Great Wars, and both of the battles hurt races. But they fought to survive, and reason has no place in the mind of a creature fighting for its life. So that explained how it was that this has happened after present time, but looked like it happened before our time, in my mind. And I thought it was an excellent explanation. So that was my first question I had that got answered with this book. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'm glad I did start with this book because I'm getting all these questions answered. The background is getting filled out for me. And so it did not make me not like the show. It actually fleshed out the show a little more for me. Made me happy. So since this book is not included in the TV adaptation except for a few flashbacks here and there, there wasn't a whole lot of, things I could say were similar or different. Matter of fact, the only differences I noticed is that Al-Anon is described as a giant. He's described as 7 feet tall, that he also looks non-human at times. The gnomes in the book are described as small and cunning creatures, and they're yellow. Their skin is yellow. On the show, they were just as tall as a regular man and wrinkly. So the book actually coincides more with what I've read in other science fiction fantasy novels where gnomes are small creatures. The book, I learned that the sword was forged by a druid named Bremen, who is Al-Anon's father, not this character Coglin in the TV show. Not a big deal. So in the TV series, Al-Anon is he's kind of abrasive. In the book, he's really described as he's kind of an ass. I do have a couple of favorite characters in this book that I met who are not in the TV adaptation at all. The first one is Panamon Creel. So just to lay a little bit of background as to what's happening, Shae Almsford is the last heir of Shannara, who were elven royalty, that the Sword of Shannara was originally forged for the elven king Gerald Shannara, and he used it to defeat the Warlock Lord years prior. The Warlock Lord has been slowly snuffing out all of the heirs to Shannara because they're the only ones that can wield the Sword of Shannara, which is the only weapon apparently that can be used to destroy him. Shae is a half-elf, half-human. So he got overlooked because he was actually adopted by a human parent and raised in Shady Vale. Well, Al-Anon has uncovered Shae, and he has come to get him in order to take him on a quest to where the druids come from, Paranor, to get the sword so that he can defeat the Warlock Lord. So along the way, you have, of course, just like similar to the Lord of the Rings, you've got your little merry band of elves and humans and dwarves going on a quest to save the world. And the band, of course, at some point everybody has their separate arc they're off going on. And Shae ends up in the company of a rock troll and a thief named Panamon Creel. When I first met Panamon Creel, I didn't like him. But as I continued reading, I thought, this guy, the way he's being described right now is exactly how probably some of my friends would describe me. And so then I found myself suddenly loving the guy, and he ended up being one of my favorite characters. I'm going to read that passage to you, and for those of you that know me, I want to know if you agree, so let me know in the comments below if this is something you would say to describe me. Conversation was not lacking, however. In fact, there were several times when Shae wished that Panamon Creel would tire of his own voice for a few minutes. The tall thief carried on in a steady conversation with his companions, with himself, and on occasion, with no one in particular, for the entire morning. He talked about everything imaginable, including a good many things about which he seemed to know nothing. So I read that passage and I thought, that's kind of me. So then suddenly, out of nowhere, I ended up loving the guy. My other favorite character in this story was Minion Lee. So my assumption was that Shae Almsford was going to be the main character. But I do feel like this was almost an origin story for Minion Lee. He had the most complete story arc out of all of the characters, in my opinion. Of course, he is a prince who was Shay's best friend. He had no interest in running his kingdom. He preferred to hunt. He was a great tracker. He tags along with Shay and Flick as they're going to meet Al-Anon. And he just develops into an amazing character, just the strength that he finds in himself. He discovers that he does care about people, and he wants to be, and he actually wants to be something. He wants to do good things. He meets a beautiful girl. He saves the beautiful girl. He saves the damsel in distress. He gets the girl of his dreams. He has an amazing story arc, and I loved it. It was my favorite part of the book, to be quite honest. So now, from what I truly think of this book. And so for all of you Terry Brooks fans out there, I'm just going to go ahead and put on my hater blockers because I could not stand this book. This book, this huge 726-page book literally could have been condensed to 330 pages and would have been a whole lot better of a story. Terry Brooks went into descriptions about his descriptions. It was ridiculous. I can't tell you how many times I was reading this book and I fell asleep. I nodded off. I started thinking about grocery shopping, things I needed to do around the house, and then I'm like, oh wait, I've been sitting here reading and I totally forgot what I was reading. I would have to go back and reread, start thinking about something else again, to the point where there were actually some passages that I had to read out loud to stay on track with the story. It was ridiculous. The first 30 to 50 pages were fantastic. The next 400 pages were a complete snooze fest. This book at that point became a chore to read. And I really didn't even want to finish it, but I thought, you know, I need to get to the second book. Now I understand why the TV adaptation started with the Elfstones of Shannara, because this book sucked so much. So I do have the Elfstones of Shannara. I am going to give it a try to see if this series can be redeemed in the second book, and I'm hoping that it can. I love the TV show. Maybe they started with the second book because that's where the meat of the story is. That's where all the good stuff was, all the good material. I'm not excited about it, but I hope that changes. I'm just so confused because, like I said, you assume reading the back of the book that this is going to be about Shay and his journey, and it really was about so many other things other than Shay, and I was so disappointed. Shay was a weak character. The ending where he finally comes up against the Warlock Lord, the whole book, the Warlock Lord is just described as this huge evil, and the Sword of Shannara is the only thing that can defeat him. However, when it comes down to it, it was such a disappointing. I mean, it was over in 5 minutes. It was hugely disappointing. The ending where Shay comes up against the Warlock Lord, that was the most pitiful, epic battle ever. This book gets 2 stars, and that's being generous. So for all you Terry Brooks fans, try not to hold it against me. That's just my personal opinion. Maybe it's because I feel like this story is almost an exact replica of The Lord of the Rings, except The Lord of the Rings was way more entertaining, way more of an interesting story. Everybody had an interesting story. There were no wasted characters, in my opinion, of that book. The Sword of Shannara, without a doubt, will be on the unhaul list for February. So with that, that is my book review of The Sword of Shannara. I will begin the Elfstones of Shannara very soon, and I hope that with that review, my attitude and opinion of these chronicles will change. The Elfstones of Shannara can redeem this series. this book will still be gone. I'm keeping my expectations for the Elfstones of Shannara extremely low. Let's hope the Elfstones of Shannara can redeem this series. So overall, at the end of the day, here is what I think of this book. Won't even make it to my bookshelf. And that wraps up my review of the Sword of Shannara. Stay tuned for the next in the series, the Elfstones of Shannara. I will get that book read, get my thoughts up about that. Hope you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, drop me a comment below. Let me know if you agree with my review. If you disagree, I would love to have a conversation, and maybe you'll change my opinion, or maybe you'll say something that causes me to look at it in a different way. I don't have high hopes for that happening, but I'm definitely open to the conversation. Y'all have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.